So to do a glow, I normally do these the same way I do simple things like lightsabers, and the same method as the light swirl tutorial if you've seen it. If not, search for it. It's on Aetutsplus as well. So let's start with this clashy thing in the middle. So if we go into the clashy thing comp, let's just turn off the visibility for our footage and create a new solid. So layer, new solid, or Control Y if you remember the shortcut. Now let's make this one black. This one has to be black. And OK. And stick it at the bottom of the stack. Now I'm just going to highlight everything, so Control A, and click one of the arrows just to collapse everything. And Control Alt Y, which is the shortcut for the new adjustment layer. Now you can probably see each time I create a new one, our wiggle expressions are changing, so our clashy thing changes as well. So we'll just delete these and click on adjustment layer, and let's get a fast blur. Why? Because it's fast. Okay, we'll set our transfer mode here to screen and just set the blurriness to about 7 and make sure you click repeat edge pixels. And then if we highlight our adjustment layer again, remember to deselect and reselect just so we don't duplicate our fast blur, and Control D a couple of times. Now we want to go in and pump up the values, maybe 35, 100, and then 400. And you can see it's glowing quite a bit, but that's a bit too much. Maybe change that to 45. If we highlight all our layers and hit T, and just change the opacity, turn it right down. And if we go back into main comp, hit F4 to toggle switches and modes, and change that to add. Now I'm not really liking the look of this. Sometimes it's good because it adds a little bit of fake lighting, but maybe we'll change it to screen this time and change the fake lighting ourselves. So let's go back and maybe pump up the values a bit more. And as our viewer is locked to main comp over here, we can update values and see it update live. So just pumping these values up. Maybe change this down to about 77. Okay, I'm liking the way that looks. So basically what these adjustment layers are doing is copying all these layers underneath it and adding a blur to it. So as we do it for each increment, it's blurring it more and more, and then since we've set it to a screen transfer mode, it's adding it back over the top. So to demonstrate this, that's duplicating it and blurring it, and then more, and then more, and then more. And this gives us a nice soft glow. So if we highlight these and copy paste them to the top of beam 1, we got to check our order because the highest value should be at the top. So that should be 45, 7, 45, 77, and 400. And of course we need to make a new black solid and put it at the bottom and turn our guide layer footage off. Now if we go back into main comp, change beam 1 to screen, and looks like we need to go in and turn these values down. Since it's not as big, we need to have lower blur values. So maybe turn that down to 2, 25, 50, and 100. Maybe a little bit less, 60. Alrighty. So you can see the difference there. And now if we select the top, hold down shift, select the bottom, and copy and paste to beam 2. We want to select one tip at the top and just paste, because it will paste the layers above whatever layer is selected. And also another good tip is whatever you select last in your whole selection is what's going to be at the bottom of the stack. So if we delete that and do it again, we've got 60 at the top of the stack here and 2 down the bottom. So we've got 60. If we hold shift and click 2, copy that, click one tip and paste it, we're going to have 60 at the top and 2 at the bottom here. And again, a new black solid, and we want to turn off the footage there. Okay, and now back to main comp, set this one to screen as well, and now things are glowing. So now let's color it a bit. Let's start once again with the clashy thing, get a color balance, and stick it on top. I'm actually going to shut off the visibility for those. And let's check out our video clip once again. We've got a blue beam here, a red beam here, and in the middle it seems to be pink. So let's try and replicate that. So we want this to be pink. So if we turn up our highlight red, and we do want to check preserve luminosity, midtone red, let's pump that up. And we also want to pump up the blues. Like that, and maybe a little bit of green in the highlights. Oh, just a little bit. So we've got a pink clashy thing. Let's turn on one beam, copy our color balance and paste it onto this one, and let's just put that all the way to 100 and go through like that. Sometimes it looks alright with the preserve luminosity off, but you can see how it's got some really horrible artifacts around the edge. It's just not soft at all. Like that. Okay, and copy that one and paste it onto beam 2. Except this time we'll go through and add a bit of green and a bit of blue. So there's maybe a little bit more green. Give it a nice icy blue look. Okay. Now you can experiment with colors. I think this clashy thing isn't pink enough. You want to be a little bit careful of how far you push the values, and I'm actually going to swap the color of the beams around. So beam 1 can be blue. Cool. So let's do a round preview of this. Okay. Now that it's glowing, we can see some of the particles that weren't really visible in the first initial explosion here, and it looks like we've cut off a little bit too much. So let's just go in and fix that up quickly. Hit U on the particles to bring up the keyframes. And we just want to bring it back a little bit. Yeah, right there. And of course clip that to the first frame, which is Alt and open square bracket if you've forgotten the shortcut. Alright, a few things are standing out here that just aren't selling the effect. For one, it looks like the floor is a little bit too low, and a couple of other things are the white of the clashy thing is a bit too bright for what would be realistically captured by the camera in this scene. So let's unlock our viewer and go back into clashy thing. Let's find our floor solid and turn visibility on, and we'll just move this up a little bit. And you can see how that's being pushed back a little bit, and that looks like it's much more in the center. So if we click on clashy thing and we'll add an exposure, put that on the bottom, and let's just turn it down a bit. You don't want to turn it down too much because then things will start to go see-through, but turn it down just enough that it's still bright but not too bright. You can see how the whites are being dulled down a little bit, which is subtle, but it just makes that much of a difference. Might even push it to 0.2, minus 0.2. Okay, and we won't have to do that for our beams since they're only small and they look okay already. So maybe 0.1, well, minus 0.15. Okay, so now let's add some interactive lighting. So if we go Control Alt Y, which makes a new adjustment layer, put it just above your footage. We want to get our color balance again and drop that on. Change this to Add, and let's pump up, preserve luminosity, pump up the reds, pump up the blues, and let's create a elliptical mask. So we want to just try and get the rough area, and I'm hitting V there to go back to the arrow tool. Hit F for feather, feather it out a lot, and T will bring down the opacity. And you can also play around with the blending modes. It will be more pink if you have it on normal, but I would prefer to have Add because that boosts the light and makes everything look a bit more natural. And just messing with the masks here. Might turn it up a bit more, bring it down here a bit more. And okay, now if you want to go through and do some articulate roto for the colors of the beams here, you can, but oftentimes you can get away with just doing a loose mask. So we'll duplicate our adjustment layer, delete the first mask, and just put a general big mask over here. F for feather, and feather it out again, and we just want to delete the blues so it's more red. And once again, duplicate, V for the arrow tool, double click our mask, and let's move it over to this side and make it a bit bigger. And of course, add some green and some blue. It's maybe a little bit too much. And we want to feather that out a lot more actually. If your masks are a little bit too hard to see, you can always click on the little yellow box and change the color. So that's much easier to see. Just drag it over here. Same thing with the red. Drag that a bit more into there. And of course these are way too bright, so we'll just tone them down. And here too. And also on the ground. I think that's a little bit too bright. So you can see the difference even some quick fake lighting makes. It just blends everything into the shot a lot better. And I think that's maybe too low now. Just doing a few more tweaks here. Now normally when things are glowing this hot, there's some heat distortion. So let's get on to making that. Let's pre-compose these first. Click, hold down Shift, and click again, and Control Shift C to pre-compose. And we'll call this Effects. Go back into Main Comp, and we want to hit F4 to toggle the switches and modes, and just click our Collapse Transformations. So that's basically pre-composing and acting like all the layers were still here. So let's duplicate this. We don't want collapse transformations here. Solo it, and we just want to get a tint effect to make it black and white. And also get a fast blur because it's fast. Repeat edge pixels and blur it out. just like that. Now we also want to get a fractal noise. We want to change the blending mode here to multiply. So we just get our noise over the top of what was white before. Let's up the complexity a little bit. I'm going to transform, turn down the scale, and I also like to change the fractal type to dynamic. So now alt-click on the stopwatch for evolution, type time times 1000, and if we go frame by frame, you can see what that's doing. Now also we want to set a keyframe for offset turbulence. Go forward a few frames, move it up in the y-axis, like that. And if we highlight this keyframe and drag them to the start, alt-click our offset turbulence and type loop out, open parentheses, quotation mark, continue, quotation mark, close parentheses. What that's doing is it's looking at how much the value is changing between these two keyframes and continuing it for the rest of the comp. So you can see it's still moving, which is cool. Okay, let's just up the contrast a little bit and turn down the brightness a little bit, and let's get another fast blur by selecting it, duplicate it, drop it to the bottom of the stack, and we want to turn that down to about 5 just to soften it a bit, maybe 7. So basically what we've just done is create a displacement map from our effects we had before. So if we unsolo that, turn the visibility off and go to footage, get a displacement map effect. I'll just turn our effects off here and choose our effects layer for the displacement and use the luminance and luminance, and if we up the values quite high, you can sort of see what's going on here. Normally you shouldn't have them that high though. Usually 25 is too much, maybe 15 by 15. Okay, now you can see what problems popped up here. This is one of the ones that just happens and people freak out, don't know what's happening, their edges disappearing. And that's because displacement maps, when you work from the luminance, use white as one direction and black as the other. So middle gray will be not moving anything, and that's what we need to do here. So let's pre-compose this one more time, move all attributes, and let's name this displacement map and hit enter. And Control Y to make a new solid, and we want this to be 50% gray, and OK, and OK, and below there. And now if we hit F4 to toggle switches and modes, we want to set this one to screen to get rid of the black. And now if we duplicate this, go into our fractal noise and hit invert, and get an invert effect, put it on the bottom, and go multiply. So now we have some black and some white with a grey background. Now it looks like it's hitting the edges. Normally that can produce a few errors, but I'll show you how to fix those too. So back into main comp, you can see all our edges aren't moving. We've got a little bit of black behind it, but that's an easy fix. If we just duplicate our footage and delete the displacement map and then drop it below, you can see it's fixed. So now if we do a RAM preview, you can see what's going on. Now it looks like we've got way too much. So let's turn that down, maybe to 5. I'm going to go back into the displacement map, maybe make our fractal noise a bit smaller. So back in transform, let's scale it down to 50, and of course we need to do it the same for this one. And it also looks like it's moving up a little bit too fast. So if we select both of them and hit U, highlight our keyframes, and just move them across. So now that's moving up much slower, maybe even a little bit more. Yep. And I think I'll turn down the speed of the evolution too. Whoops. We want this to be fast, but still quite slow, since this is pretty big. And a general rule of thumb is the bigger it is, the slower it's going to appear to move. Even though it would move the same as a smaller thing, it's just where you're viewing it from. If something's bigger, you'll be further back and it'll look like it's moving slower. So I might even slow this down a little bit more. And do a quick RAM preview to see how it animates. So that looks okay. Go back into main comp. And now all we need to do is animate our interactive lighting. So I'm just going to turn this footage off. That's our displaced footage. Let's name that. And find where our effects start, which is there. So if we turn all these down to 0, we want to add a keyframe for this one and this one. Go forward to where they're fully extended, which is there. Maybe make them 30 and 30. That looks a little bit too bright. Maybe 20, 20. And we want to adjust the opacity on this one now too. Maybe turn it up to 7 for the start bit, because it will still emit light up here, and then as it starts to fall, gradually bring it up. Like that. And also I'll turn these up again too. So I'd encourage you to go for a bit more of an articulate fake lighting, because the tighter your mats are, the more realistic it'll look. Okay, now one last problem is we've got our particles in front of the legs here when they really should be behind. So if we create a new solid, Control Y, doesn't matter what color, hit OK, turn the visibility off, and let's solo our footage. Now grab the pen tool and just do a quick mask around the legs. And at the start, some of the particles flew over her body, so we'll just quickly get that. If you hold Control, you can select other points in the mask whilst you're creating them and tweak them, which is a really handy to do. And just go like this. Her legs are pretty stationary for most of it, so you shouldn't have to animate it, but go back and check it anyway. But the less roto you have to do, the better. Okay. So I'm going to put a marker here, just so we know which frame we created the roto on, just in case we need to animate and set a keyframe. And we want to turn the visibility on and solo that one as well. Hit F, and let's give it a blur of maybe 3 pixels. Turn it down to 2. You can see our rotor is a little bit loose here, so just click the point and use the arrows to nudge it across. And let's move that just down and across, and that'll do. So now if we unsolo them, go back to our effects and put the grey solid above the effects layer. Hit F4 to toggle the switches and modes, and now we're going to use our layer that we just rotoed to cut out parts of our particles here. Edit, cut, go back into your clashy thing, edit, paste, and we'll put it on top of our particles layer and do a alpha inverted there. Or you could have also just made a black solid or converted this into a black solid, since everything here is black. So if we go back into main comp, now you can see there's no particles on top of our legs. So one last thing is we want to add some grain to our effects here to blend them into the footage a little bit nicer. So let's just add a grain, match grain onto our effects. We want our viewing mode to be preview. Just move it up to where there's lots of effects. Our noise source layer we want on our footage. And that's basically sampling the noise on our footage and using it for the noise on here. Now that's a little bit too much. So if we go into tweaking and turn the intensity down to like 0.2, and now we can go final output. And for some reason that set up back to normal, so we'll have to set that back to screen ourselves. And it's only a subtle thing, but it makes a world of difference. Awesome. Okay, now let's turn on our displacement again. Maybe turn it up a little bit to 7. And I want to make a new adjustment layer, which is Control-Alt-Y once again, and do a bit of color correction over the whole lot. So if we go curves, let's crush the blacks a bit more. Add a levels control. Then we go into the blue. And just crushing the whites a little bit so they're not so hot. We've got some blue in the shadows, and go into green, maybe turn down the green in the highlights a little bit. Whoops. And Control Y for a new solid. Make a very dark blue. Okay, okay. Double click the ellipse. Invert. Set this to multiply. Hit F for feather. Feather it a lot. And I'm just going to bring the edges in. If you double click any mask point, it'll bring up your box, and we can scale it down whilst holding Control to do both sides at the same time. Click on our solid again, hit T, and bring down the opacity. So you can see we just created a nice vignette there. Maybe even less. Don't want it to be too apparent. So one last thing I want to do is make a big flash of light, just to give it more impact when these beams hit together. So Control Y for a new solid. Let's make it a bright pink to match the color here. Okay, set this to add. Let's actually go layer solid settings and make it a bit less pink, a bit more white. Like that. Alt square bracket to trim the in point to the current time. Hit T to bring up the opacity. Click the stopwatch and go forward 2 or 3 frames and turn the opacity to 0. And of course you can hold Alt and right square bracket to trim the out point to there. And let's do one final RAM preview. So this looks like a pretty cool effect. Now there's only one thing we forgot to do down here, which was track the roto to her legs, since the camera is still moving. So we'll do that quickly now. Click on footage and track motion. There's lots of high contrast points. Let's do the one on her leg down here. And again, we want the RGB tracker. So let's go to options and check that. And just track from here. It doesn't need to be too accurate though, since the particles are really just sitting in the same spot. And they'll be flying past for 1 frame, maybe 2. Okay, now let's Control-Alt-Shift-Y for a new null object. Edit target, change that to null object, OK, and apply. Okay. Now Control-X to cut that null object out of main comp. Go into clashy thing, select our grey solid, Control-V to paste, and let's just jump forward in time, and we want to find this 1 frame here where we made the marker so we knew which frame we rotoed. Go back to clashy thing and just simply link our layer to the null object. So one more RAM preview, and there we have it. Now this is really just the beginning of the effect. The main part of the beams hitting each other, the energy flying everywhere. There's so much more that can be done with this. Half of it is in the fake lighting. If you do have practical lights that you can switch on and off on set, I would highly recommend you do that to light up your actors. All the particles around the edges here need a bit of work with the lighting to make it light up around where they are. You can also have bolts of lightning shooting out and hitting dirt, throwing it up. Like in the original video clip I showed, you could even have particles dripping out of the main beams. The possibilities are endless. So I hope this tutorial helped you out, taught you some things, and I look forward to seeing some results posted in the comments.